Tomas, ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And my name is Hui Lu. I work for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Let me first welcome all of you to join us today here in person or virtually to the press conference with Mr. Tomas Ojea Quintana, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Mr. Quintana is a lawyer from Argentina. He has been working in the field of criminal law, human rights law, representing NGOs and other groups in different cases, including child abduction by military regime, sexual abuses by members of the church, and the business criminal liability for human rights abuses. He's currently also the lawyer of a universal jurisdiction case on the abuse against the Rohingya people. Mr. Quintana has served previously as a special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar from 2008 to 2014. He has also worked for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Bolivia, at the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, as well as for the Parliament of Argentina. The mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Democratic People's Republic of Korea was first created by the former UN Commissioner on Human Rights in 2004. Following the establishment of the Human Rights Council, replacing the former commission in 2010, the mandate has been renewed on an annual basis since then. Mr. Quintana was appointed by the Human Rights Council in 2016 as a special rapporteur for this mandate. He will present his annual report to the General Assembly this afternoon. We are very pleased to have this opportunity to hear the exchange with Mr. Quintana, as also he's finishing the mandate, the term as mandate holders by the end of this year. So let me first give the floor to Mr. Quintana for a short presentation, and before we take some questions, comments from the room and virtually. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody this morning. This is a great opportunity to have an exchange with the media that has always been playing an important role in the North Korean human rights agenda. As it was said, this is my last time in New York as the Special Rapporteur for the situation of human rights in the DPR Korea. I will report this afternoon to the third committee of the General Assembly. And I would like to share with you some of the ideas and elements of that report to the third committee, and then I will be happy to listen to your questions and possibly to respond effectively to them. So let me start. I will share with you a couple of paragraphs of my report, and then we can have an interaction in our conversation. So the DPR Korea has never been more isolated from the international community than at this point in time. This is having a dramatic impact on the human rights of the people inside of the country and dampens hopes of achieving sustainable peace and security on the Korean peninsula. I urge the DPR Korea state, the international community, and its individual members to be guided by the principles of the United Nations Charter and to reverse this trajectory. There must be a move back towards the spirit of multilateral cooperation that enabled the foundation of the United Nations in the first place. Even prior to the onset of the pandemic, over 40% of the people were food insecure, with many suffering from malnutrition and stunted growth. The country's health infrastructure suffers from underinvestment, with critical shortages of essential medical supplies and the absence of equipment and adequately trained staff. The lack of access to clean and water, safe water, sanitation, and hygiene services at home, schools, and in hospitals also underpins many health and nutritional issues. The draconian steps that the DPR Korea state has taken to prevent COVID-19 from entering include a policy of shooting individuals who attempt to enter or leave the country. Increased restrictions on freedom of movement and the shutting of national borders has shocked market activity that has become essential for people's access to basic necessities, including food. People's access to food is a priority concern. I must reiterate the words in my report to you that the people of North Korea should not have to choose between the fear of hunger and the fear of COVID-19. The DPR Korea must initiate a dual-track approach of addressing long-standing human rights issues and recognizing and re-engaging with the international community. The problem of isolation is also leading to a creeping apathy within the international community towards the deteriorating humanitarian and human rights situation inside the country, as information from within rises up. While the people of North Korea are facing shortages and collapse in their livelihoods, the state continues with its missile launches and with the wider region veers towards an arms race. This captures the paradox of the sanctions regime. I take this opportunity to urge all relevant parties to take steps towards finding a peaceful resolution of the long-standing conflict on the Korean peninsula. The extreme isolation of the country could crystallize and become the new norm. And you know that I have been always applying a two-track approach towards the human rights agenda, which is to look into the issue of accountability, but to invest a lot of efforts on engagement, the government. But I would like to highlight that adopting a determined approach to engage does not require the neglect of human rights violations, including the issues that I have included in my report, especially the issue of political prison camps. The political prison camps continue to exist in North Korea, and they represent, the most serious human rights situation with regards to the country, in my view. And the government has not addressed this issue, has denied the existence of political prison camps, and therefore it is critical to continue to stress that this is an issue that needs to be addressed by my mandate and the international community. So I will conclude with this by saying to this afternoon I will address the General Assembly, and I'm going to say to the General Assembly that they must continue to recognize by consensus the situation of human rights in the DPR Korea. Although the government of North Korea does not accept my mandate, that does not change the reality that the human rights situations in the country continues to be serious. Their denial of this mandate does nothing to change the widespread and systematic patterns of abuses that are ongoing in the country. And again, I urge the General Assembly to adopt a resolution by consensus, and that's it. I will conclude now and open the floor for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quintana. Now, before you ask question, comments, could you please identify yourself first, Eddie? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quintana, and good luck to you in wherever your next job takes you. Thank you for doing this briefing on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association. Welcome. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. In your report, you warned of looming possible starvation, especially among the elderly and children. How serious is that, and has it started already? Is it actually happening? And secondly, On the issue of getting food into the country and sanctions, is it that there are still obstacles in getting sufficient humanitarian aid into the country, even though humanitarian aid is exempt under the sanctions regime? Or is it that the DPRK is spending so much money on its nuclear and ballistic missile programs that it is not devoting enough resources to keeping its own population healthy?
Thank you very much. We know from statistics from the past that the situation with regards to access to adequate food was already serious in the DPR Korea. I just said that 40% of the population faced food insecurity. We know that now that there are food shortages. I have included in my report information about the risk of children and elderly possibly to be initiating a cycle of starvation. But at the same time, we know that the government is investing efforts to prevent starvation in the country. Even the President Kim Jong-un has recognized a grim picture with regards to this issue about food and the problems in the agricultural sector and all that. So I don't have more information to respond precisely to your question about where we are standing on this point, but we are very concerned. And you may know that there is no United Nations staff on the ground. The UN country team and the resident coordinator has been out of the country already for some time. So that brings an additional complexity to assess the reality of the ordinary citizens, especially in the rural areas, you know, or and the orphan children, and so on and so forth. The situation with the sanctions regime has an impact on the work of our colleagues from the humanitarian field. That has been very clear. There has been very serious problems with, for example, with banking channels, the administrative costs and risks, problems with the custom clearance, reluctances from foreign suppliers, increased cost in operations and in items to send to the country, de-risking financial institutions. A lot of problems related to the sanctions, directly related to the sanctions regime. That I hope that the Sanctions Committee of the Security Council, who is having a communication with the OCHA, especially, the humanitarian agency, trying to overcome this problem, but continues to be a situation of concern. The closure of the border, especially with China, where trade basically gives the opportunity to the people to survive and to make their livelihoods. And as long as the borders continues to be closed, we may be facing risks of starvation of some segments of the populations in the country.
Just a quick follow-up. Do you believe that the Security Council should lift sanctions or some sanctions?
I have recommended that, especially under the circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Security Council Sanctions Committee should re-evaluate the sanctions regime under the circumstances, and when necessary, to ease those sanctions that bring these obstacles to basically to the, not only, and I made a clear point, not only to the humanitarian assistance operations, but also to the overall possibility of the ordinary people to make their livelihood. For example, if we talk about those sectorial sanctions against the export of textiles or seafood, we know that in North Korea, on those industries, it's the women who work, and we have been reported that women have been losing their jobs, you know, and in some, you know, households, especially since the political system is not working in the country, it's women who support, you know, the family with this kind of jobs. So there is also a dimension, a human rights dimension connected to sanctions, and that's why I'm saying that there is a paradox here, you know, because we see that the situation of the social and economic rights is deteriorating in the country, and at the same time we see that the government continues to test missiles and probably diverting resources that should be allocated in these areas. I wouldn't go into too much detail because I don't have information about how this exactly operates in the country, but you can say that much of the money used to carry out this test could go to these segments of the population that are suffering.
Thank you very much. So let me see if we have any questions. Those who joined virtually, could you please raise also your hand or put the word in the chat box so I can identify you. So gentlemen, and then the lady up there.
James Bays from Al Jazeera. I know it's a complicated area. I'm still slightly confused by the sanctions position, because we are told by members of the council that they have all the exemptions in place, and any time someone comes forward and says there's a problem here, they work it out. And in fact, there are those on the council, for example, the US ambassador, who says her problem with the 1718 Sanctions Committee is that it's not enforcing the sanctions tough enough. So could you try and explain to me where the system goes wrong with sanctions? Because you're saying people are potentially starving. They're saying, no, we look at everything, and if there's a problem, we create an exemption. So just explain to me a little bit more where the system currently goes wrong. And also, a follow-up, do you plan to meet, for example, Norway, the chair of the 1718 committee, while you're in New York?
Yeah, thank you again on this. As you recognize, it's a complex issue. And I heard the statement of the U.S. representative, I think was yesterday. But to be accurate, members of the Security Council, and especially the Sanctions Committee, and I did meet the Norway delegation yesterday, and this is something I have been doing since I started with this mandate, always coming here and trying to connect the human rights agenda to the security agenda. And it has been a process of evolution and progress in the Sanctions Committee in implementing this waiver methodology, etc. It's not that it's static, you know. In the past, it hasn't existed, the waiver, for example. And then they issued some guidelines. So there's a process of building together the best response to this problem. And I would say to you even that it's not that they deny that the sanctions are having an unintended impact. Clearly they recognize that the sanctions are having an unintended detrimental impact, and I emphasize that they say unintended, because this is what the resolutions say. And if you go to, for example, the report of their panel of experts, you know, the experts that supervise the compliance of the international community with the sanctions regime, you will find a section, clear section, where they address the detrimental impact of sanctions, and they recognize all these elements. So there is this paradox, as I just say, you know, and this is exactly a word that was given to me by one of these stakeholders, you know. This is a paradox in the sense that the international community needs to be quite strong in delivering the message to North Korea that they cannot continue to pursue the nuclear and ballistic technology program. And that's very clear, and that's against the non-proliferation accordance at the international level. So that's very clear. But at the same time, we are facing this situation. So we need answers, and we are trying to look into these answers. I think that my role is to be as vocal as possible, you know, and to try to also share this with other stakeholders, the media, to try to also you look into the problem. And I did, in my meetings and in my report, urge the Security Council Sanctions Committee and the Security Council P5 members to contemplate the COVID-19 pandemic situation and, when necessary, ease sanctions. That's a clear recommendation.
Thank you. So, ladies in the back.
Thank you very much, Carla State, Global Research. Have you been in contact with Dr. Key Park, the neurosurgeon who's the director of the Korea Project at Harvard University? He has been invited by the North Korean government to perform neurosurgery. He's been to Pyongyang about 20 times, and he and I have been in quite a bit of communication. He stated at a briefing that was held at the Church Center, but which should have been held here, since the UN should have been made aware of the terrible problems resulting from the sanctions. He is unable to perform surgery because the sanctions prevent the implements necessary. They're either blunted or rusted or whatever. Now, he's pretty horrified by this. This is... I also spoke with Gary Gottlieb, who is CEO of Partners in Health at Harvard, and he had said that there were restrictions on going to North Korea, but they were not from the North Korean government, they were from Washington. So I have to ask the question whether these unintended consequences are unintended. And there is a lot that is also, while we're on the subject, are you familiar with a new book called Immovable Object on the 70-year war between North Korea and the United States, in which the author states that the amount of money spent on the nuclear weapons is actually enormously less than would be spent on conventional military. So the diversion of resources is actually less with this. So if you haven't spoken with Dr. Park, it would really be important to hear what he has to say, because the so-called humanitarian exemptions, at least according to Ambassador Nebenzia and Dr. Park, who's from South Korea, they are not working. They are grossly not working. So are they listening to you when you present this? Do you have the sense that you're getting through?
Thank you. And again, the issue of sanctions is an issue that we need to continue to focus on. The ban on imports, ban on fuel, machinery, spare parts have definitely impact on energy, security, civil transportation, agriculture, healthcare, sanitation. So that has been recognized by the panel of experts of the Sanctions Committee. But so I will continue on that. I will continue to deliver my message, and hopefully, and I should be fair and to say that the Sanctions Committee always accepts to receive me and to interact with me and to take my ideas, and that's very important. That's very important. I wanted to make a point on the access to food and the possibility of hunger. And you asked me about children and the elderly. And one of the serious concern from the human rights point of view is how is the situation of the prisoners in North Korea with regards to adequate food. It has been reported in the past, and even the Commission of Inquiry of 2014 proved that in some occasions prisoners were starved as a pattern of violating their human rights. So under this dire situation with the COVID-19 pandemic that made closer to close the borders, and also the sanctions regime, and also an economy that state command economy that has failed, we are really concerned about to what extent the prisoners, especially those in the political prison camps, are facing hunger due to the lack of adequate food. And in conventional prisons, I would say in the ordinary detention facilities, usually the prisoners rely on the food that their families bring to them. You know, it's not that they rely on the diet from the prison. And precisely because of the restriction of movements adopted by the government due to COVID, there is also an impact on those prisoners who are in ordinary facilities. So, again, the whole picture with regards to the dire humanitarian situation, especially on the food insecurity, it's quite concerning.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Let me check online virtually. I don't see any hands raised in the chat box, if I'm correct with the colleague. Okay, so if no more questions,
Let me make
maybe
just one last point again on the issue of isolation. I just said that we see North Korean being isolated. Being at the level of isolation that we haven't seen before, and this is a very serious status quo that, if it's not changed, will impede the possibility to address human rights of North Koreans in the country, will not allow to discuss other human rights issues that involves third countries, like the situation of the abductees, Japanese abductees, the issue of separated families between South Korea and North Korea. Without an environment of dialogue, without communication, without engagement, there is no hope for all these human rights grievances. And I conclude.
Please.
Just a quick follow-up on that issue. What could actually take place in the DPRK that could change that situation and basically reopen the borders, for example, and let the UN teams to return?
On the health front, talking about the COVID-19, there is a discussion about the vaccination of the population in North Korea. You may know that North Korea rejected an offer from COVAX, and there is a discussion about whether the international community should be ready to offer North Korea a full-scale vaccination of the population, since it is clear that the government fears a lot an outbreak of the COVID in the country, and unless all the population is vaccinated, could be the case that borders may continue to be closed. And we have been reported that there are some ideas of opening some special zones in the border area to do trade with China, but by protecting the population from COVID-19. So these are conversations that are ongoing in this respect.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions for Mr. Quintana? If not, maybe that's at the end of this press conference. I thank you very much again for coming, and all the best for Mr. Quintana for this afternoon to report to the General Assembly and your future endeavor. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.